Hi, this is History with me, Dan. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, the city of Hartford was in the throes of redevelopment. At the time of this aerial photograph, massive demolitions had already cleared much of Hartford's old East Side neighborhood along Front Street, south of Morgan Street. Soon, the same thing would happen north of Morgan Street, along Market, Village, and Windsor Streets. Along Morgan Street itself, the new east-west highway, today's Interstate 84, was being constructed west from the Bulkley Bridge. It would pass by Front and Market Streets, and then, where Morgan Street met Main Street, it would cut right through the point where Main makes a bend to the northwest. There was a row of buildings here, extending from what was known as Needham's Corner around the bend to what had once been the site of the Fourth Congregational Church. The church's former home then became the Grand Theater and then later the new Parsons Theater. I'd like to talk about that church and theater in another video, but in this video, I'm going to talk about the now lost building at Needham's Corner, which was directly in the path of the highway. This building existed for nearly 100 years, across from the intersection of Main and Morgan Streets. For most of its history, except for Prohibition, it was home to wholesale retail liquor businesses, saloons, and restaurants. This is a northwestwards view up Main Street, taken in the aftermath of the blizzard of 1888. On the west side of Main Street, just before the street bends to the northwest, was a 4-story French Second Empire-style building. It was already 20 years old at the time of the blizzard, having been built in 1868 by Michael C. Needham, an Irish immigrant who was born in Tipperary in 1832. Needham had been operating a liquor business on Front Street. As the Hartford Courant newspaper described his new building on August 13, 1868, quote, "The building has 36 feet front and 75 feet depth, and is 4 stories high, with a full basement and a mansard roof. On the ground floor there are 2 stores, with fronts of glass and iron columns. The north store will be rented, while the south one will be handsomely fitted up and occupied by Mr. Needham himself as a store. The basement, which extends under the whole building, will be rented either as a restaurant or barber shop. The 3 upper stories will be occupied by Mr. Needham as a residence. The front of the block is of Philadelphia pressed brick, very handsomely laid and oiled, and the window cornices are of ornamental iron. A handsome balcony extends along the 3rd-story front. The roof is covered with slate in 3 colors arranged in tasteful figures. Light is admitted to an upper story by 3 large dormer windows in the roof. The whole building was put up by Day's Works in the most thorough manner. D.F. Tryon was the builder, excepting of the front. Dennis Roach, No. 14 Linwood Street, contracted by the Day to lay the Philadelphia brick front. Heretofore it has been the custom to send to New York and Philadelphia to get men to lay this kind of brick. Mr. Roach thoroughly understands this branch of the business, and it saves a good deal of trouble." Unquote. Needham continued in the liquor business in his new building, where he sold such products as Lippmann's German bitters, as shown in the advertisement on the right. After his death in 1876, his widow Ellen, who died in 1899, continued to reside in the building and manage the estate, renting out space on the 1st floor to her son, William F. Needham, who operated a saloon. The Courant reported what it described as a peculiar accident at the saloon on April 19, 1894. Quote, George A. Needham, collector for the saloon of his brother, William F. Needham, at 475 Main Street, was badly burned yesterday morning. He was in the cellar about 11 o'clock in the morning, flushing out beer pipes with hot water and an alkali solution. The faucet that he put in a barrel was not fastened on properly, and it burst out. He was stooping on his knees at the time, and he was knocked over. He was unable to get up, and the steam and alkali solution poured out upon him for some time. His cries brought to his assistance a clerk in Hannon's drugstore, and he was removed to his home over the saloon. Dr. Scully was called and attended to his injuries. His abdomen was badly burned, and his arms and legs did not escape the scalding matter. Dr. Scully said last night that Mr. Needham would probably recover, but the full extent of his injuries would not be known for a few days. Unquote. In 1897, William F. Needham sold his saloon to Colonel William Donague and P.S. Kennedy. The Current at the time noted that, now that he had sold his store, quote, Mr. Needham has no business in view, but he will have more time to devote to snare drumming, unquote. That's because Needham was a musician who had been a drummer in Colt's band. He eventually moved to New Britain, Connecticut, and at the time of his death in 1936, he was one of the oldest drummers in the state in the membership of the Musicians' Union. Colonel William Donague, one of the partners who acquired Needham's saloon, had immigrated to America from Ireland when he was 21 years old. For many years he had been in the wholesale liquor business with his brothers Patrick and Edward before going into business by himself, opening a liquor store on Union Place. In 1908, he formed a partnership with another Irish immigrant, grocer Philip S. Kennedy, who had come to Hartford at age 13 and later opened a meat and grocery store at the corner of Main and Morgan Streets. Together, the partners opened William Donague and Company, a grocery store on Central Row, and, as I mentioned, in 1897, they expanded into the space formerly occupied by Needham's saloon, which they remodeled and later extended in the rear. They began an advertising campaign that made grandiose claims about the international fame of Needham's Corner, saying, for instance, quote, one of the most famous of Hartford landmarks is Needham's Corner, known everywhere as the center of her business activity and the turning point of her principal thoroughfare. So far from Needham's Corner is the answer to all inquiries as to point of location. Manchester, Burnside, East Hartford, Glastonbury, Windsor, Pequannock, all Main Street, Vernon Street, and Albany Avenue cars pass this famous corner and stop at its crossing, unquote. Elsewhere they went further, declaring, quote, Needham's Corner is now a household word wherever the English tongue is spoken, unquote. And, quote, there will be held this evening at Hartford's most historic spot, a reception which will be remembered for many a long day by those who are fortunate enough to attend it. The fame of Needham's Corner is already worldwide and need not be rehearsed. But the fact that William Donague and Company have there opened a California wine depot which will surpass any emporium of a like nature to be found in New England is not generally known, and it is for this purpose that the proprietors have announced the grand opening for this evening. It is fitted up with the beauty of modern art, and neither skill, energy, nor expense has been spared to make this the popular rendezvous of Hartford for all who use the delicious and delightful product of the far western grape, unquote. Donague died in 1911, and the following year his partner Kennedy took over the businesses at Central Row and Needham's Corner under the name P.S. Kennedy and Company. A decade later, though, Prohibition had begun, and things had changed greatly in the vicinity of Needham's Corner. On February 4th, 1921, a reporter in the Current observed a northward movement of retail shops that was replacing the old-time saloons in this section of Main Street. Among several new women's stores along the block was Stewart's at Needham's Corner. The reporter contrasted this with the old days. Quote, "That section of Main Street was formerly known, in a way, for its saloons, and some of them were regularly patronized by farmers who came from towns east or northeast of Hartford. For many years, Needham's Corner was the stomping ground for many of the vegetable gardeners, horse dealers, and cattle dealers who came into the city to do business. Many wanted a drink when they came to town, and also wanted one before going away, and in all probability took something away with them. A change from this class of business to the latest fashion hint from Paris may be called a radical change." Unquote. The photo on the right brings us forward another decade, to 1931. By this time, the Needham's Corner building no longer had a mansard roof with dormer windows, as shown in the older image on the left from circa 1913. Instead, as shown on the right, the top floor had been raised to a full fourth story. The three-story building just south of Needham's was probably built in the early 19th century and remained much the same, except for the later addition of a large advertising billboard on the roof. The very similar three-story building, just north of Needham's, however, had lost its third story by 1931. Back in 1913, the building housed John J. Curtin's package store and cafe, which was said to be popular with sporting enthusiasts. But in 1931, one of its businesses was a clothing store. In fact, we can date this image to late 1931 because of two businesses that were only located in these buildings for a short time. Smiley's Shop, a women's clothing store, had first opened in June 1931 at 1013 Main Street, but moved to 1059 Main, just north of the Needham's Corner building, that September. The store was gone within 18 months. Lasting an even shorter time was the Kitchen Shop, which opened at 1047 Main in the Needham building in October of 1931. By December, less than 2 months later, Harrop's Furniture Store across the street was advertising that it had bought a large part of the stock of the Kitchen Shop at auction and was offering it for sale at ridiculously low prices. The rapid failure of these two businesses may relate to the fact that this was still the early days of the Great Depression. In 1932, there was a candy store at 1047 Main, but with the end of Prohibition the following year, the Tally-Ho Tavern, which had decor inspired by old English taverns, opened in the building. It was operated by Israel Wolfe, who 2 years later expanded the business into the Tally-Ho Restaurant, which occupied 3 floors of the building and featured a spacious dance floor. In 1945, Wolfe sold the restaurant to a corporation led by the Hartford restaurateur Carl V. Carbone. The Tiara restaurant soon opened in the building and remained until 1960. Both the Tally-Ho and Tiara restaurants were known as places where customers might encounter well-known actors and performers. That's because of their proximity to the State Theater on nearby Village Street and the New Parsons Theater, located just a few doors up Main Street. With the coming of the highway, the restaurant's owners, brothers Armand and Alfred Latanzio, moved to a new restaurant called Armando's on Route 5 in East Windsor. As for the old Needham's Corner, as we know, that building and the others along that stretch of Main Street were demolished. But the next time you're on I-84 and you pass through the tunnel under Main Street, think of the liquor that once flowed here, except during Prohibition, and the various businesses many run by Irish, Jewish, and Italian immigrants that once flourished here. Thanks for watching, and if you haven't done so yet, remember to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel